Close your eyes for a moment. Actually, you need to keep reading, but imagine you did. In that darkness, where do you go? When you open them again, the world floods back in, sharp and immediate and real. The screen in front of you, the room around you, the weight of your body in the chair. It all feels so undeniably there, so solid, so true. But here's the thing that will haunt you once you understand it. None of what you're experiencing right now is actually happening in the place you think it is. The colors you see, they don't exist out there in the world. The sounds you hear, they're not floating through the air in the form you experience them. The pain you feel when you stub your toe, the taste of coffee on your tongue, the feeling of being you, none of it is where you think it is. It's all happening in about 3 pounds of wet tissue locked inside a pitch-black silent vault of bone. Your brain has never seen light, it's never heard a sound, it's never felt the touch of another person. It sits in total darkness and silence, receiving nothing but electrochemical signals, and from that, it constructs everything you've ever experienced. Every sunset you've watched, every conversation you've had, every moment of joy or heartbreak or boredom, all of it is a reconstruction, a simulation, an illusion so convincing that you've spent your entire life believing it was reality itself. This isn't philosophy or mysticism, this is neuroscience. And once you truly grasp what it means, you'll never look at your life the same way again. Because if your brain is creating your reality, then the question isn't just, what is consciousness? The question is, who's really in control here? And if you've been living in an illusion your whole life, can you change it? Let's find out. Picture a theater. You're sitting in the audience, watching a movie on the screen. The images flicker by. A face, a landscape, a story unfolding. This is how most of us think about consciousness. There's the world out there, the movie, and there's us in here, the audience, passively watching it all unfold. We think consciousness is the act of observing reality, like sitting in that theater seat taking it all in. This model is so intuitive that it's dominated philosophy and psychology for centuries. The philosopher René Descartes imagined it literally. He thought there was a special place in the brain, the pineal gland, where the physical world and the immaterial mind met, a sort of screening room where the soul watched the body's experiences. Even though we've abandoned Descartes' specific idea, the metaphor lingers. We still talk about consciousness as if it's a spotlight, illuminating whatever we pay attention to, as if there's a little you inside your head watching the show. Neuroscientists call this the Cartesian Theater, and here's the problem. It doesn't exist. There's no screen. There's no audience. There's no little person sitting in your head watching your experiences, because that would just raise the question, who's watching them? It's an infinite regress, a loop that never solves the puzzle. So if consciousness isn't a theater, what is it? Let's start with what we know for certain. Your brain is made up of roughly 86 billion neurons, each one a tiny electrical device firing signals to thousands of others. At any given moment, there are trillions upon trillions of these signals zipping around, creating patterns of activity. Somehow, and this is the hardest question in all of science, these patterns give rise to the feeling of being you, the redness of red, the ache of loneliness, the taste of chocolate. Philosophers call these qualitative experiences qualia, and their existence is both the most obvious thing in the world, you're experiencing them right now, and the most mysterious, we have no idea how they arise from mere matter. Here's where it gets weird. You'd think that with all those billions of neurons firing, consciousness would be this massive, overwhelming flood of information. But it's not. Consciousness is actually incredibly narrow. Right now you're aware of these words. Maybe you're vaguely aware of your posture or a sound in the background. But you're not aware of the feeling of your clothes on your skin until I just mentioned it. Or the position of your tongue in your mouth, or the fact that your brain is coordinating thousands of muscles to keep you breathing, balancing, and alive. In fact, At any given moment, you're conscious of maybe 0.0001% of what your brain is doing. The vast majority of your mental life is unconscious. Your brain is processing millions of bits of sensory information every second, running complex calculations, making predictions, and triggering behaviors. And you have no idea it's happening. Consciousness is just the tip of the iceberg, and it's not even the tip that's steering the ship. So what is consciousness for? Why does the brain bother creating this narrow window of subjective experience at all? One answer is that consciousness is what happens when the brain needs to integrate information from different sources to solve a problem. Imagine you're walking through a dark forest at night. You hear a rustling in the bushes. Your brain needs to pull together data from your ears, the sound, your eyes, the darkness, the shapes, your memory. What dangerous animals live here? Your body, your heart rate, your muscle tension, and your goals. Should I run or investigate? Consciousness might be the workspace where all these different streams of information come together into a unified experience, the feeling of being alert, scared, and curious all at once. But even this explanation leaves something out. Because consciousness isn't just about integrating information, it's about what it feels like to be you. And that feeling, that subjective, first-person quality of experience, remains one of the deepest mysteries in science. The philosopher David Chalmers calls it the hard problem of consciousness. We can explain what the brain does and even how it does it, but we can't explain why it feels like something to be a brain doing those things. Unless, what if we've been asking the wrong question? What if consciousness isn't a thing the brain has, but a thing the brain does? What if it's not a passive theater, but an active process, a constant act of creation? This is where things get really interesting. Here's a thought experiment. You're standing in a forest. Suddenly, you see a long, thin, curved shape on the ground. Your brain has milliseconds to decide, is that a stick or is it a snake? If you wait for all the sensory data to come in, the exact texture, the way the light hits it, whether it's moving, you might be dead. So instead, your brain makes a guess based on probability. It asks, given everything I know about this environment, my past experiences, and the current context, what is this most likely to be? This is called Bayesian inference, named after the 18th century mathematician Thomas Bayes, and it's revolutionizing our understanding of the brain. The idea is simple but profound. Your brain is not a passive recorder of reality. It's a prediction engine, constantly generating hypotheses about what's out there and then testing those hypotheses against incoming sensory data. Think of it like this. Your brain has a model of the world, a massive, complex, constantly updated simulation built from every experience you've ever had. When sensory information comes in, your brain doesn't start from scratch, assembling reality piece by piece like a jigsaw puzzle. Instead, it starts with its best guess about what's happening, and then it uses the sensory data to confirm or update that guess. In other words, perception is not a bottom-up process, data to brain to experience. It's a top-down process, brain's prediction to data to updated experience. Your brain is constantly hallucinating your reality, and the sensory data is just there to keep the hallucination in check. This explains so much. It explains why you can read this sentence, even though the rods are SRB malsed. Your brain predicted what the sentence would say, and the actual letters were just good enough to confirm the prediction. It explains why you can have a conversation in a noisy room. Your brain is predicting what the other person will say based on context, and then filling in the gaps when the audio is unclear. It explains optical illusions. Remember the hollow mask? Your brain's prediction, faces are convex, is so strong that it overrides the actual sensory data. This face is concave. The prediction wins. It explains the placebo effect. Your brain predicts that the pill will reduce pain, and the prediction literally changes the way it processes pain signals. The belief becomes the reality, and it explains why you have a blind spot in each eye, but you never see a hole in your vision. Your brain just predicts what should be there, probably more of whatever is around the blind spot, and fills it in seamlessly. You're not seeing what's there. You're seeing what your brain thinks should be there. Now, here's where this gets philosophical. If your brain is constantly predicting your reality and only using sensory data to make small corrections, then what you experience as the world is actually a construction. It's your brain's best guess, rendered in vivid detail inside your skull. The neuroscientist Anil Seth puts it perfectly. We're all hallucinating all the time. When we agree about our hallucinations, we call it reality. But let's go deeper, because it's not just the external world that's a hallucination. The biggest illusion of all? It's you. Who are you? No, really. Stop and think about it for a second. You have a name, sure. You have a history, a body, a personality. You have memories of your past and plans for your future. You have preferences and fears and quirks. All of this adds up to a feeling, a sense of being a continuous, unified self, a you that exists from moment to moment, from birth to death. But what if I told you that this self is also a construction, a story your brain is telling itself? Let's start with your body. You feel like you inhabit your body, right? You feel like you're in your head, looking out through your eyes. But this feeling, this sense of embodiment, is actually a prediction your brain is making. And we know this because we can hack it. There's an experiment called the rubber hand illusion. You sit at a table with one of your hands hidden from view and a rubber hand placed in front of you. A researcher strokes the rubber hand and your real hand simultaneously. After a few minutes, something bizarre happens. You start to feel like the rubber hand is your hand. When the researcher threatens the rubber hand with a knife, your heart rate spikes. You flinch. Your brain has updated its prediction about which hand is yours, and now the illusion feels completely real. We can go even further. With virtual reality, we can give people entirely different bodies, taller, shorter, different genders, different species, and within minutes, people start to feel like those bodies are theirs. They move differently. They think differently. Their sense of self shifts to accommodate the new body. This tells us something profound. Your sense of having a body, of being in a body, is not a given. It's a construct your brain builds from sensory feedback and prior expectations, but it goes deeper than the body. What about your thoughts? Surely those are purely yours, right? Wrong. Most of your thoughts are unconscious predictions bubbling up into awareness. You don't choose what thought comes next. It just arrives, and you claim it as yours. Try this. Sit still for 30 seconds and don't think about a white bear. Go ahead. I'll wait. How'd that go? The harder you tried not to think about the bear, the more it showed up, right? Because you don't have direct control over the content of your consciousness. Thoughts arise based on a complex interplay of your current context, your emotional state, your memories, and random neural activity. You're not the author of your thoughts, you're the audience. And yet you experience them as yours because your brain tags them with a sense of ownership. Even your memories, the story of your past, are unreliable. Every time you recall a memory, you're not playing back a recording. You're reconstructing it from fragments, and your brain fills in the gaps with predictions about what must have happened. Over time, memories drift, warp, and merge with imagination. Studies show that people can develop completely false memories of events that never happened, just from suggestion and imagination. Your past is not a fixed truth. It's a story you keep rewriting. And your sense of being a continuous self over time, that's an illusion too. You're not the same person you were 10 years ago. Your cells have been replaced. Your memories have changed. Your beliefs and values have shifted. The philosopher Derek Parfit argued that personal identity is not a deep metaphysical fact, but a loose, conventional concept we use for practical purposes. There's no essential you that persists over time, just a series of overlapping connected mental states. So if your body is a construct, your thoughts are automatic, your memories are unreliable, and your continuity is an illusion, then what are you? The Buddhist answer, which modern neuroscience is starting to echo, is simple. You're a process, not a thing. You're a verb, not a noun. The self is not a fixed entity hidden somewhere in the brain. It's an ongoing activity, a story the brain tells itself moment by moment to create coherence and continuity. The psychiatrist and neuroscientist Giulio Tononi describes consciousness as integrated information. The self is what happens when your brain takes all the disparate streams of data, sensory input, memories, predictions, emotions, and integrates them into a single unified experience. That integration is you. And it's happening right now, constantly, in real time. The philosopher Thomas Metzinger goes even further. He argues that the self is a transparent model. Your brain builds a model of a self to navigate the world, but it doesn't show you the model. It shows you as if you were a real, independent self. It's like wearing virtual reality goggles. You see the virtual world, but you don't see the goggles. The self is the goggles. And because the model is transparent, you mistake it for reality. This is not a new idea. 2,500 years ago, the Buddha taught that the self is anatta, not self. That the feeling of being a separate, independent I is an illusion, a source of suffering. Modern neuroscience is now giving us the empirical evidence to support that insight. But here's the twist. Just because the self is an illusion doesn't mean it's not real. The experience of being you is real. The suffering is real. The joy is real. The question is, if you know it's an illusion, does that change anything? Spoiler, it changes everything. Let's zoom out for a moment and think about what we've established so far. Your brain is locked in a dark, silent skull, receiving nothing but electrical signals. It uses those signals to construct a simulation of the world, a controlled hallucination that we call perception. It doesn't stop there. It also constructs a simulation of you, a self that feels continuous and coherent, even though it's really just a story being updated moment by moment. So what is reality? This is where things get philosophically slippery, so let's tread carefully. There is, presumably, an external world out there. Stuff exists. Matter, energy, the laws of physics, they're real. When a tree falls in a forest and no one is around, it still makes vibrations in the air, even if there's no conscious experience of sound. Science assumes this, and for good reason. The external world is stable, predictable, and shared. We can all agree that gravity works the same way, that water is H2O, that the speed of light is constant. But here's the kicker. You have never, and will never, experience that external world directly. You only experience your brain's reconstruction of it. And that reconstruction is not a perfect copy. It's a heavily edited, simplified, biased, and interpretive version designed not for truth, but for survival. Let me give you an example. Color. You see a red apple and you think, red is a property of the apple. But it's not. Redness doesn't exist in the apple, or even in the light bouncing off the apple. The light has a wavelength of about 700 nanometers. That's all. It's just electromagnetic radiation. Redness is something your brain creates when it processes that wavelength. It's a quale, a subjective experience with no counterpart in the physical world. Different animals see the world completely differently. A bee sees ultraviolet light. A dog sees fewer colors. A mantis shrimp has 16 types of color receptors, we have 3, and perceives a visual world we can't even imagine. Each species is experiencing its own version of reality tailored to its needs. None of them are seeing the truth. They're all seeing a useful fiction. Humans are no different. The philosopher Immanuel Kant argued that we can never know the thing in itself, the noumenon. We can only know the world as it appears to us, the phenomenon, filtered through the structures of our mind. Space, time, causality, these aren't features of reality. They're features of our way of experiencing reality. They're the operating system our brains use to make sense of the raw data. The cognitive scientist Donald Hoffman takes this even further. He argues that evolution doesn't favor truth, it favors fitness. Our perceptions didn't evolve to show us reality as it is. They evolved to show us a version of reality that helps us survive and reproduce. Hoffman uses the metaphor of a computer desktop. When you see a little folder icon on your screen, you don't think, "Ah, yes, this is a precise representation of the magnetic states on a hard drive." You think, "That's where my files are." The icon is a user interface designed to hide the complex truth and give you something useful. Hoffman claims that our entire perceptual world is like that desktop. It's an interface. The apple isn't really red and round and solid. Those are just icons, simplified representations that help us interact with something. What's really there, underlying it all, might be utterly alien to us. We're not built to perceive it, just like we're not built to perceive quantum fields or 11-dimensional strings. This is called perceptual realism versus interface theory. And it's one of the most mind-bending ideas in modern philosophy of mind. If Hoffman is right, then the entire world you see, objects in space, colors, sounds, textures, is not reality. It's a species-specific hallucination shaped by millions of years of evolution to keep you alive, not to show you the truth. Now, I know what you're thinking. This sounds like solipsism, the idea that only your mind exists, or like we're living in the Matrix. But it's not quite that. The point isn't that the external world doesn't exist. It's that the world as you experience it is a construction. There's something out there, but you're not seeing it directly. You're seeing your brain's interpretation. And here's why this matters. If your reality is a construction, then the boundaries of that reality are not fixed. They're negotiable. They can be changed. If consciousness is a controlled hallucination, then what happens when the control breaks down? The answer is both terrifying and enlightening. You get a glimpse behind the curtain. You see the machinery of consciousness itself. And it's stranger than you ever imagined. Let's start with neurological disorders. These are like natural experiments that reveal how the brain builds reality. Take anosognosia. After a stroke, some patients become paralyzed on one side of their body, but they don't believe it. You can show them their paralyzed arm, ask them to move it, and they'll insist they just moved it, or that the arm isn't theirs, or that there's nothing wrong. Their brain has lost the ability to update its model of the body, so it just keeps predicting that everything is fine. The hallucination continues, uncorrected by reality, or consider Capgras delusion. Patients believe that a loved one, a spouse, a parent, has been replaced by an identical imposter. What's happening? The visual recognition system is working fine. They recognize the face, but the emotional response is disconnected. They don't feel the warmth and familiarity they expect. The brain's prediction doesn't match the data, so it generates a bizarre explanation. This must be a different person. The illusion of identity falls apart. Then there's Charles Bonnet syndrome, where people with vision loss start seeing vivid, complex hallucinations, faces, patterns, animals, entire scenes. These aren't in their imagination. They're perceived as real, out in the world. Why? Because the brain is a prediction machine. When the sensory data stops flowing, the brain keeps predicting. And without feedback to correct those predictions, they run wild. The hallucination becomes untethered. Even more unsettling is depersonalization disorder, where people feel like they're watching their own life from outside their body. They feel disconnected from their thoughts, their emotions, their actions. Everything feels unreal, dreamlike. What's happening is that the brain's model of self has become unstable. The integration is breaking down. The illusion is visible as an illusion. And then there are psychedelics. When you take a substance like psilocybin, magic mushrooms, or LSD, something profound happens to consciousness. The normal, stable, predictable hallucination of reality dissolves. People report seeing impossible colors, feeling like they've merged with the universe, experiencing ego death, the complete dissolution of the sense of self, or encountering what feel like other dimensions of reality. What's going on? The neuroscientist Robin Carhart Harris has a theory. Psychedelics disrupt the brain's default mode network, a set of regions that are active when you're thinking about yourself, your past, your future. This network is crucial for maintaining the story of you. When psychedelics turn down the volume on this network, the self model collapses. The boundaries between you and the world blur. Your brain stops making such strong, rigid predictions, and the raw, chaotic stream of sensory data floods in. Interestingly, this can be therapeutic. Studies show that a single psychedelic experience can reduce depression, anxiety, and even existential distress in terminally ill patients, sometimes for months or years. Why? One theory is that people get stuck in rigid patterns of prediction. They believe deeply that they're worthless, or that the world is meaningless, or that they're trapped. These predictions become self-fulfilling. Psychedelics shatter those patterns, giving the brain a chance to reset, to consider new possibilities. In a way, psychedelics reveal that the stable, coherent reality you experience every day is just one possible configuration of consciousness. It's not the truth. It's just the mode your brain happens to be running in. But you don't need drugs or brain damage to experience the edges of the illusion. Meditation can do it too. For thousands of years, monks, mystics, and meditators have been hacking consciousness. They've developed techniques to alter perception, dissolve the self, and experience reality in radically different ways. And for a long time, science dismissed this as superstition or wishful thinking. But in the last few decades, neuroscientists have started studying advanced meditators, and the results are stunning. These people aren't just relaxing or feeling good. They're fundamentally changing the way their brains construct reality. Let's start with mindfulness meditation. The basic practice is simple. Pay attention to your present moment experience without judgment. Notice your breath, your body, your thoughts, your sensations. When your mind wanders, gently bring it back. What's happening in the brain? Normally, your default mode network, that self-referential storytelling system, is constantly active. You're always thinking about yourself, your past, your future, your worries, your plans. This constant narrative is the backbone of the self-illusion. But when you meditate, you practice disengaging from that narrative. You observe thoughts as events, not as you. And over time, studies show the default mode network becomes less active. The sense of self becomes more flexible, less rigid. You start to see thoughts as temporary patterns, not truths. You start to experience yourself as a process, not a thing. Advanced meditators report experiences that sound mystical, but align perfectly with the neuroscience. They describe the dissolution of the boundary between self and world. They experience what's called non-dual awareness, a state where the subject-object split disappears, where there's just awareness itself, with no separate you doing the experiencing. The neuroscientist Sam Harris, who is also a meditator, describes it like this. Normally, you feel like you're a subject in your head, looking out at the world, having experiences, but with meditation, you can notice that this feeling is an illusion. There is no center. There is no you standing apart from experience. There's just experience arising moment by moment, consciousness without a self. This might sound abstract, but it has profound practical implications. If you stop identifying with every thought and emotion that arises, you stop suffering from them in the same way. You don't take them so personally. A thought of failure is just a thought, not a truth about who you are. An emotion of fear is just a sensation, not a command you have to obey. Buddhist psychology has known this for millennia. Suffering arises from clinging and aversion, which arise from the illusion of a separate self. If you see through that illusion, suffering doesn't disappear. Pain is real, but it loses its existential weight. Modern psychology is catching up, acceptance and commitment. Therapy, ACT, teaches cognitive diffusion, learning to see thoughts as just thoughts, not reality. Mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR, uses meditation to help people with chronic pain and illness by changing their relationship to suffering. The body still hurts, but the brain stops adding layers of narrative and resistance on top of the pain. Neuroscience is even starting to understand the mechanisms. When you meditate, you're practicing meta-awareness, awareness of awareness. You're training the brain to monitor its own predictions. This creates a feedback loop. The brain starts to notice when it's lost in stories, when it's conflating prediction with reality. It gets better at catching itself in the act of illusion making. And here's the beautiful part. This isn't some mystical achievement reserved for monks on mountaintops. You can start right now. Close your eyes, notice your breath, notice the sensations in your body, notice that there's a gap between the raw sensation and the story you tell about it. Notice that you are not your thoughts, you're the space in which they arise. Do that for 5 minutes a day, and over time, the structure of your consciousness will start to shift. The illusion becomes more transparent. You gain a kind of freedom that's hard to describe, but impossible to forget once you've tasted it. But let's go even deeper, because there's one more layer to this onion, and it's the most disturbing and liberating of all. If your thoughts are predictions generated by unconscious brain processes, and your sense of self is an illusion, and your experiences are controlled hallucinations, then where does that leave free will? This is the question that keeps philosophers and neuroscientists up at night, and the answer, depending on who you ask, ranges from free will is completely real to free will is the most harmful illusion of all. Let's start with the neuroscience. In the 1980s, a researcher named Benjamin Libet did a famous experiment. He asked people to perform a simple action, flex their wrist whenever they felt like it. He measured 3 things: when they became consciously aware of the decision to move, when the brain activity associated with the movement began, and when the actual movement happened. The results were shocking. The brain activity started about half a second before people reported being consciously aware of their decision. In other words, the brain had already committed to the action before you decided to do it. The conscious experience of choosing was just a story the brain told itself after the fact. This has been replicated and extended in numerous studies. Researchers can now predict, using brain scans, what decision you're going to make several seconds before you're consciously aware of it. You think you're choosing whether to press the left or right button, but your brain has already decided, and the conscious experience of choice is just window dressing. So does this mean free will is an illusion? The philosopher Daniel Dennett says no. He argues that free will isn't about some magical, uncaused power to override the laws of physics. It's about being the kind of agent whose behavior is sensitive to reasons, who can deliberate, consider consequences, and act in accordance with your values. The fact that this all happens in a brain made of neurons doesn't make it less real. But others, like Sam Harris, argue that the subjective experience of being a free agent, the feeling that you are the author of your thoughts and actions, is indeed an illusion. You can't choose what thought comes next. You can't choose your desires, your genes, your upbringing, or the neural patterns that generate your decisions. At best, you're a witness to a process that feels like it's yours, but isn't ultimately under your control. Harris suggests an experiment. Right now, think of a movie, just any movie. Go ahead. Got one? Okay, now ask yourself, why did that movie come to mind and not another? You didn't scan through a list of every movie you've ever seen and consciously choose one. It just popped up. And the reasons it popped up, some association, some recent memory, some pattern of neural activity, are hidden from you. You don't know why. You just claim the thought as yours and move on. This is true for every thought, every decision. They arise from a complex stew of prior causes, most of which are unconscious. You're not the author, you're the narrator, making up a story after the fact to explain what just happened. If this is true, and the neuroscience strongly suggests it is, then what are the implications? First, it means we need to rethink moral responsibility. If people's actions are the result of their brain states, which are the result of their genes and environment, which they didn't choose, then is it fair to blame or punish them? This doesn't mean we abandon the concept of justice, but it might mean we shift from a retributive model, punishment as revenge, to a consequentialist model. How do we protect society and rehabilitate offenders? Second, it means we need to be humble about our judgments. When you see someone behaving in ways you find reprehensible, cruelty, laziness, stupidity, remember, they didn't choose to be the kind of person who does that. They didn't choose their brain. This doesn't excuse harm, but it does invite compassion. Third, and this is the liberating part, it means you can stop beating yourself up. That voice in your head telling you you're not good enough, you didn't choose to have it. Those anxious thoughts spiraling out of control, they're arising from causes you didn't pick. You can still work to change them, we'll get to that, but you can stop blaming yourself for their existence. The Buddhist teacher Ajahn Chah said, "All formations are impermanent. When one sees this with wisdom, one turns away from suffering." The formations he's talking about include your thoughts, your emotions, your sense of self. They arise and pass away according to causes and conditions. You don't control them, but you can change your relationship to them. And here's the paradox. Even though you don't have free will in the ultimate metaphysical sense, you can still exercise will. You can still make choices, set goals, change your habits. The brain is a learning machine. It updates its predictions based on experience. You can feed it new data, new thoughts, new experiences, new environments, and it will adapt. You didn't choose to be who you are, but you can choose who you become, not because you have some magical power to override causality, but because choice itself is part of the causal chain. Your decisions matter, even if they're determined. This is called compatibilism, the idea that free will and determinism can coexist. And whether or not it's philosophically satisfying, it's practically useful. Because it means that even in a deterministic universe, your actions have consequences. You can change your life. You just can't take full credit or full blame for it. So here we are. You're living in a controlled hallucination. Your sense of self is an illusion. Your free will is, at best, a complex trick of the brain. Everything you see, hear, feel, and think is a construct. Now what? Here's the good news. If your reality is a construction, then it can be reconstructed. You're not a prisoner of your brain's predictions. You're a participant in them. And once you understand the rules of the game, you can start to play it differently. Let's talk about neuroplasticity. For most of history, people thought the brain was fixed. You're born with a certain set of neurons, and that's what you're stuck with. But we now know that's wrong. The brain is constantly rewiring itself based on experience. Neurons that fire together, wire together. Pathways that are used frequently get stronger. Pathways that are neglected fade away. This means your brain is not a static thing. It's a dynamic, adaptive system, and you can shape it. How? Through deliberate practice. Every time you repeat a thought, a behavior, a reaction, you're strengthening the neural pathways that support it. If you habitually think, "I'm not good enough," your brain builds highways for that thought. It becomes an automatic prediction, a lens through which you see the world. But if you catch that thought and challenge it, wait, is that actually true? What's the evidence? You're creating a prediction error. You're telling your brain, hey, this model might be wrong. And if you do that enough times, the brain updates. The old pathway weakens and new ones form. This is the basis of cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. You're not trying to suppress negative thoughts or force positive ones. You're training your brain to notice its predictions, test them against reality, and update them when they don't fit. You're hacking the hallucination. The same principle applies to habits. Every habit is a prediction. When X happens, I do Y. If you want to change a habit, you have to disrupt the prediction loop. Change the context, X, or change the response, Y. And over time, the brain will adapt. But it's not just about thoughts and behaviors. You can also change your baseline emotional state. Neuroscientists have found that people who practice loving-kindness meditation, wishing well for themselves and others, show increased activity in brain regions associated with empathy and positive emotion. Over time, they become dispositionally kinder and happier. The brain's default mode shifts. You can even change your sense of self. Studies on psychedelics and meditation show that the rigid boundaries of the self can be softened or dissolved entirely. People report lasting changes in their sense of identity. They feel more connected to others, less anxious about death, more at peace with uncertainty. Here's the key insight. Your brain is not trying to show you the truth. It's trying to minimize prediction error. It wants a stable, coherent model. So if you want to change your reality, you have to systematically introduce new data that contradicts the old model. Want to believe you're capable? Do something that proves it. Start small. Accomplish a task you thought you couldn't. Then do it again and again. Over time, your brain will update its prediction about who you are. Want to feel less anxious? Practice exposing yourself to the things you fear in a safe, controlled way. Each time you survive the experience without disaster, your brain updates its model. Oh, maybe this isn't as dangerous as I thought. Want to feel more connected to others? Practice empathy. Listen deeply. Imagine what it's like to be in their shoes. Your brain's model of self versus other will start to blur. You'll feel less separate, less alone. This is not positive thinking. It's not affirmations or wishful thinking. It's strategic, evidence-based brain training. You're not denying reality. You're giving your brain new data so it can construct a better reality. And the beautiful, terrifying truth is this: there's no limit to how much you can change. The brain you have today is not the brain you'll have in a year if you train it differently. Your personality, your beliefs, your emotional baseline, none of it is fixed. You are a process, and processes can be redirected. But, and this is important, you have to be patient. The brain doesn't update instantly. It updates through repetition. Change is slow, incremental, and often frustrating. The old predictions are deeply ingrained. They'll keep resurfacing again and again. That's normal. That's how learning works. The trick is not to fight them, but to observe them. Notice when the old prediction arises. Label it. There's the "I'm not good enough" story again. And then, gently, redirect your attention to the new data. Over time, the brain learns. If we're all living in our own subjective simulations, does that mean truth doesn't matter? Does it mean morality is just an illusion too? This is where things get philosophically sticky, so let's unpack it carefully. First, let's be clear. Just because your experience of reality is a construction doesn't mean there's no external reality. The world exists. Other people exist. Their suffering is real. The fact that you experience pain as a quale generated by your brain doesn't make it any less painful. The fact that your sense of self is an illusion doesn't mean you don't exist at all. It just means you're not what you think you are. So no, this isn't a license for solipsism or nihilism, but it does change how we think about truth and morality. Because if everyone's reality is filtered through the lens of their own predictions, then no one has perfect, unmediated access to the truth. We're all seeing a version shaped by our biology, our culture, our personal history. This is why people can look at the same event and come to completely different conclusions. It's not always because one person is lying or stupid. It's because their brains are running different models, making different predictions. A political speech, a piece of art, a scientific claim, different people will interpret them differently because they're bringing different priors to the table. The philosopher Thomas Kuhn showed this with scientific revolutions. Scientists don't just passively observe data and let it guide them to truth. They work within paradigms, frameworks of assumptions and methods. When the data doesn't fit the paradigm, they don't immediately abandon it. They try to tweak the paradigm, explain away the anomalies. Only when the anomalies pile up so high that the paradigm becomes untenable do they shift to a new one. Science is not a march toward objective truth, it's a process of updating models. The same is true in everyday life. You have a model of how the world works, how people behave, what's right and wrong. When something challenges that model, your first instinct is not to change the model. It's to reject or reinterpret the data. This is called confirmation bias, and it's built into the prediction machine. So does that mean all perspectives are equally valid? No. Some models are better than others. A good model makes accurate predictions, explains the data, and is internally consistent. Science works because it's a systematic method for testing models against reality and updating them when they fail. But it does mean we need intellectual humility. Your model is not the truth. It's a map, and the map is not the territory. Other people's maps are different, and some parts of their maps might be more accurate than yours. The goal is not to cling to your model, but to keep refining it. Now, what about morality? If the self is an illusion, if free will is questionable, if everyone's reality is subjective, then what grounds ethics? Here's one answer: empathy. Even if the self is an illusion, suffering is real. You know what it feels like to suffer, and you can recognize that others feel it too. The fact that their experience of suffering is happening inside a controlled hallucination doesn't make it less real. If anything, it makes it more poignant. We're all trapped in these little simulations, trying to make sense of the world, and most of us are suffering in one way or another. The philosopher Peter Singer argues for the expanding circle of moral concern. We naturally care about ourselves and our kin, but we can train ourselves to care about others, people in distant countries, future generations, even animals. This isn't based on metaphysical truths about the self or soul. It's based on the recognition that suffering matters wherever it occurs. And here's where the illusion of self becomes liberating. If you realize that the boundary between you and other is constructed, arbitrary, then the suffering of others becomes harder to ignore. Their pain is just as real as yours. Their happiness matters just as much. The artificial separation dissolves, and ethics becomes not a matter of obligation, but of recognition. The meditation teacher Sharon Salzberg talks about loving kindness as the natural state that arises when you stop clinging to the illusion of a separate self. When you see that we're all interconnected, all part of the same process, compassion flows naturally. This doesn't mean ethics is easy. There are still hard questions. How do we weigh competing interests? How do we handle people who harm others? What do we do when kindness to one person means harm to another? But the illusion perspective gives us a framework. Ethics is about minimizing suffering and maximizing flourishing, recognizing that we're all in this together, even if we're each experiencing it from inside our own private hallucination. Let's zoom all the way out. You are a human being on a planet orbiting a star in a galaxy among billions of galaxies. You are made of atoms forged in the cores of dying stars. You are, quite literally, stardust that learned to think. And thinking, as we've established, is a process of controlled hallucination. Your brain takes in sparse, ambiguous data from the world and generates a rich, vivid simulation. A story that includes you, the protagonist, navigating a world of objects and people. But here's the thing. This ability to hallucinate reality is not unique to you. It's not even unique to humans. Every organism with a nervous system is doing some version of this. A bat hallucinates reality through echolocation. A bee hallucinates it through ultraviolet vision and magnetic fields. An octopus hallucinates it with a completely alien nervous system distributed throughout its tentacles. Each species is experiencing its own simulation, tailored to its survival needs, and none of them are experiencing the truth. They're experiencing a user interface, a practical fiction that helps them stay alive and reproduce. Now, here's the wild part. There might be nothing special about biological brains. In principle, any sufficiently complex information processing system could generate consciousness. Artificial intelligence might one day have its own controlled hallucination, its own sense of self, its own subjective experience. Or maybe it already does, and we just don't recognize it. And if consciousness is substrate independent, if it's about the patterns of information processing, not the specific material doing the processing, then consciousness could exist in forms we haven't even imagined. Alien intelligences, distributed networks, quantum computers, who knows? The philosopher David Chalmers speculates that consciousness might be a fundamental feature of the universe, like mass or charge. This view, called panpsychism, suggests that even simple systems have some rudimentary form of experience. A photon doesn't have thoughts or emotions, but maybe it has some tiny flicker of what it's like to be a photon. And as systems get more complex, molecules, cells, brains, that experience becomes richer and more integrated, eventually giving rise to something like human consciousness. This sounds mystical, but it's actually a serious hypothesis in philosophy of mind. If consciousness is fundamental, then the hard problem, why does it feel like something to be a brain, dissolves. It feels like something because feeling is a basic feature of reality, just like motion or energy. Whether or not panpsychism is true, it points to something profound. Consciousness is not an accident, it's not a glitch. It's a feature of the universe. The universe, through you, is experiencing itself. You are the cosmos hallucinating its own existence. Carl Sagan said, "We are a way for the cosmos to know itself." And he was right. You are not separate from the universe, looking at it from the outside. You are the universe, locally organized into a pattern complex enough to generate the illusion of separateness. When you look at the stars, you're not seeing something alien and distant. You're seeing your own origins. You're seeing the furnaces that made the atoms in your body. You're seeing yourself scattered across space and time. And here's the beautiful, terrifying, awe-inspiring conclusion. If the universe can generate consciousness once in you, then it can do it again. Maybe it has, countless times, on countless worlds. Maybe the universe is teeming with controlled hallucinations, each one thinking it's a separate self, each one constructing its own private reality. Or maybe you're the only one. Maybe against all odds, you're the only point in the universe where matter has organized itself into a pattern capable of asking, "What am I?" Either way, you are here. You are conscious, and for a brief flickering moment in cosmic time, you get to experience this impossible, beautiful, confusing illusion we call life. So, here we are at the end of this journey. You know the truth now. You know that your reality is a controlled hallucination, that your self is an illusion, that your free will is questionable, and that everything you experience is a construct of your brain's predictions. You might be feeling unmoored. If it's all an illusion, what's the point? Why bother doing anything? But here's the thing, the illusion is all you have. And it's not just an illusion, it's a spectacular, intricate, deeply meaningful illusion. The fact that joy is a neurochemical event doesn't make it less joyful. The fact that love is a pattern of brain activity doesn't make it less real. The fact that your life is a story doesn't mean it's not worth telling. You are not diminished by this knowledge, you're empowered. Because now you know the rules, you know how the simulation works, and that means you can start to shape it. You can notice when your brain is running old, outdated predictions, fear, shame, self-doubt, and gently introduce new data. You can practice compassion, knowing that everyone else is also trapped in their own hallucination, doing their best to navigate a confusing world. You can meditate and glimpse the spaces between thoughts, the places where the illusion becomes transparent. You can choose, imperfectly, deterministically, but still meaningfully, to move toward flourishing, toward connection, toward understanding. You can accept the uncertainty. You'll never know the ultimate truth of reality. You're stuck inside this simulation for as long as you live. But that's okay. You don't need certainty to live a good life. You just need curiosity, humility, and kindness. And you can marvel. You can stand in awe of the fact that the universe has created this impossible thing, a controlled hallucination that can reflect on its own existence, question its own reality, and still choose to love, to create, to seek meaning. You are a pattern of information, a temporary eddy in the flow of matter and energy, a story the cosmos is telling itself. And for a brief shining moment, you get to be the protagonist. So what will you do with this moment? How will you shape your hallucination? What story will you tell? The answer, of course, is up to you, not because you have ultimate free will, but because you are the process of answering. You are the unfolding. You are the choice being made, moment by moment, neuron by neuron. And that, in the end, is enough. Because the illusion, as it turns out, is the only reality you'll ever need. Thank you for taking this journey with me into the deepest mysteries of consciousness and reality. If this exploration has shifted something in how you see yourself in the world, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. And if you want to keep diving into the nature of mind, perception, and what it means to be human, make sure you subscribe. There are more illusions to uncover, more mysteries to explore. Until next time, remember, you're not just living in reality, you're creating it.